Hello everyone, my name is Dom Hebblethwaite and I'm Head of Membership at the Chartered Institute of Linguists, CIOL. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our online roundtable exploring the efforts of CIOL, ITI and ATC to harmonise best practice around delivering certified translations and discussing how translators can effectively navigate the complex landscape for certified translations in the UK and around the world. I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished panelists for this roundtable first, but we must start with an apology. Vasiliki Prestige, one of CIOL's council members, who wrote an excellent Voices pieces on our website, by the way, which you can find, was originally due to participate in the roundtable, but unfortunately had to pull out. However, I'm delighted to confirm that CIOL's very own CEO, John Warren, is stepping in give us an overview of the efforts CIOL is making on certified translations. John, how are you?
Yeah, very well done. Great to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, our second panelist today is Raisa McNabb. Raisa is CEO of the Association of Translation Companies, ATC, representing the voice of 220 language service companies providing translation, interpreting and other language services across the UK and the world. As the ATC's CEO, Raisa's focus is on supporting a community of language service companies, collaborating with external stakeholders on best practice, policy, and sustainable development of the language services industry. She's also the association's lead on standards, overseeing the operations and developments of ATC certification. Raisa is an experienced language services production, training, and quality manager, and has worked as a freelance translator and project manager, while also holding an MA in translation and interpreting from her native Finland. Raisa, thank you for joining us. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Thanks, Dom. Lovely to be here and thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Okay, and last but not least, we welcome Mariam Abalaz. Mariam is a chartered linguist and member of CIOL's Governing Council, currently a lecturer in Arabic Translation Studies at the University of Liverpool. She's previously taught at UCL, amongst other UK universities, and has worked as an Arabic translator for the British Library for 7 years. Mariam has extensive practical experience delivering certified translations, both in the UK and in other countries as well. She started out in the UAE working as a legal translator and moved to the UK 16 years ago, passing CIOL's DipTrans in 2007. Mariam, wonderful to have you here. How are you?
I'm very good, Dom. Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Fantastic. Okay, so just to update everyone on the format for this roundtable, by the way, we've had 637 people register for this event, so we have a very large audience. And we're going to start with some polling to understand the large audience and understand your experiences with certified translations. We'll then look at some of the legal and regulatory context to certified translations in the UK and around the world, how CIOL, ATC and ITI have been working together. We'll discuss different experiences of certified translation, looking at real life examples from around the world, and we'll cover questions from the audience. There will be, just to let you know, we have a large audience, and so to manage this session effectively, everyone's camera and microphone has been turned off. There will be time for Q&A, and all the questions will be managed via the questions panel facility. So please just go ahead as we go along and post your questions, and we will cover as many as we can. If you are on X Twitter, do feel free to tweet us at CIOL_linguists, #certified translations, or on LinkedIn, the Chartered Institute of Linguists, or indeed any other social media channels. Okay then, to start us off, we have 5 quick polls so we can get a better understanding of our audience. Just to confirm, all our polls are anonymous and we do not keep the results for any other purposes. So if you could go ahead and make your selections here. Very simple question, are you a CIOL member? Okay, we'll just keep this holding a little bit longer and we'll show the results here. So we have 67%, so two-thirds of our audience are CIOL members. Very good, okay. So if we could load up the second question. And the second question, where are you based? UK, Europe, rest of the world? We'll give everybody a little bit of time to answer. Apologies, by the way, for the American spelling on the bottom of the poll. This is with GoToWebinar, we can't change that. So, okay, well, just a couple more seconds. Okay, so we have 68% in the UK, 24% Europe, and 8% around the world. Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the next poll. So do you provide certified translations? Are you already providing certified translations? So yeah, yes, often, yes, occasionally, would like to, or just curious here to find out a bit more. So we'll keep this open a little bit longer. We'll keep it open maybe another 5 seconds or so. Thank you very much. We've got 81% of the audience has voted. Do feel free if you haven't decided just to vote. Okay, so here we go. So yes, often 38%. Yes, occasionally 30%, and then 32% in total who are not currently providing certified translations. So that's very interesting. Okay, and then we have our next poll. Where have you provided certified translations? And please select one of the options. Only the UK or one or more countries, or only other countries. Okay, we'll just keep it open just a little bit longer. We'll keep it open another sort of 5 seconds or so if you could get your votes in. Okay, we'll close the poll. Okay, so only the UK, 25%, 30% UK or one or more other countries, 11% only other countries, and again, we've got around 25% who haven't provided certified translations at the moment. So that's very, very interesting. Okay, and we have one more poll now. We could just load that one up. So if you have experience certifying translations in another country, do you feel that their approach works better than in the UK? We'll keep this open another 5 or so seconds. In fact, we'll keep it open a little bit longer because I'm seeing people are thinking about answering on this. We're getting slower votes here. So yeah, we'll keep it open for another 5 seconds. Okay, 5, 4, 3. Okay, I think we can close that now. Lovely. So yes, 13% think that the approach in another country works better than the UK, 45% unsure, 15% no. So that's quite an interesting split, and plenty saying we'll be able to answer after this roundtable, which is of course a very, very acceptable answer. Okay, so that was really, really fascinating. Thank you for everyone for contributing there. That's given us a much better feel of our audience. Okay, so to start us off then, can I ask you, John, to cover a couple of questions for us? I mean, first of all, could you give us an overview of the recent efforts from CIOL, ITI and ATC to harmonise best practices for certified translations? Give us a bit of an outline also of how this project came about. And as we know, there are very wide variations in practice around the world, many other countries having regulated certified translations. So perhaps if you could also cover some of the reasons why the UK is different to so many other countries, that would also be
delighted to, Dom, thanks. So Hayla, could I have my first slide? So just to say, and we all know this, that why are we here? Because we're the chartered professional body, because we are a regulated awarding organisation, and great to hear, Mariam, you have the DIP Trans, a wonderful qualification, still open for bookings, I might add. We also obviously are here to represent and support linguists as a profession, as well as shared with RISA and ATC, setting benchmarks for quality and standards We have 5,000 members worldwide and can award the title Chartered Linguist, and great to have one amongst us today. So next slide, please. So when we came together, and it's important to thank Raisa and also to thank Karina Balbo, who may be with us, who is a former CIOL Council member, who were both at the origin of this piece of work. And of course, important to thank ITI as well. I think we have some ITI members in the audience, and it was great to work with ITI on this. So what was the point at the origin? Well, we recognized that there was wide variation in practice around the world. So this is something that we regularly hear from members of all three organizations. There's a bit of frustration, and probably quite significant frustration in the UK, that there isn't greater control over or mandated use of appropriately qualified, certified or accredited translators. So there's a feeling that it's a bit loose in the UK and a bit variable in the way that government goes about it and public bodies go about it. So there's frustration, I think, for members in that. And there's a feeling that some people in government and in some public services, particularly around the UK, either don't understand about translation, or even worse, maybe don't seem to want to understand about translation. So we have a strong feeling as a profession and as professional bodies and as professional translators that standards are important, and standards need to be maintained, and there are very real risks if they're not. But sometimes the people that we talk to or the people that we deal with don't seem to see it that way and don't seem to recognize the seriousness. So then, the fundamental and underlying concern is that underqualified people could be selling their services and undermining quality and opportunity for professionals, and also potentially putting businesses and individuals at risk by providing them with translations that contain mistakes and errors, which could be highly problematic for them. So that's the problem that we set out to solve. And just to say, how did that kind of crystallize in our first conversations? Well, interestingly enough, we were talking about Argentina, and Argentina has admirable practice around translation. So it has clear standards, clear code, clear expectations, clear rates, has all sorts of things that that if you come from Argentina and you come to the UK, you think, well, wow, we have all these things in Argentina, why don't they have them in the UK? And that triggered a conversation that we'll share today and expand today, which is what might be the drivers of why different countries do things in different ways. Some of them might be to do with governments and politics, but others might be to do with some fundamentals around the way that regulation and expectations work in different countries. So we thought we'd expose some of the conversation that we had on that, which might explain a little bit of why countries are different. And then if we want to make different countries perhaps do this a little bit better, what would be the kind of the best way into that, if you like. So next slide, please. So basically, the big contextual difference that it's only one of many differences between countries. Having worked around the world for a number of organisations, the startling thing about countries is how very different they are, as well as how very similar they are. So there is a lot of variance here. But a really, really important distinction in the way that countries are constituted and the way that governments run is basically whether you run on a civil law system or on a common law system. And civil law systems basically are systems where the expectation is that what is permitted and what is allowed is codified and is written down and is available in a book. So, for example, I lived and worked in France for many years, and everything is in the French legal code. There are books and books and books which cover every possible eventuality. So what is permitted and what is not permitted is absolutely written down, and it's in the code. It's one of Napoleon's great gifts to French society. Indeed, when I worked in advertising, the most important question in advertising was not whether it's an effective strapline, but is it permitted and what does it say about it in the legal code? So we spent more time with lawyers than we did with creatives when we were doing advertising in France. So basically, France is a very good example of a civil law context. What's a good example of a common law context? well, the common law context is the UK, and I'll come on to what that means in a moment. The other very common form of legal system is one which has religious or traditional origins, and again, they are very often book-based. So either a holy book, or alternatively another book which captures the traditions of that particular culture and civilization. And that will be the point of origin for the approach to legal systems. So the big difference between these two sorts of systems is codes versus precedents. In one system, it's all written down. In another system, it's all permitted and all allowed, unless there is a clear precedent and some case law which guides it or permits it. And this is the big difference for the UK system, common law system. We operate on a precedent system. So basically, we don't have a codified legal system. We have a precedent legal system where you have to look back at case law and look back at what a judge decided in the last most relevant case. And that's basically how the UK's common law jurisdiction works. And of course, because the UK was once a significant actor in the world, there are a lot of other countries that have common law systems which were basically introduced to them by the UK in its colonial past. So the other big difference between legal systems is whether the default is that something is permitted or the default is something is forbidden. And if you have a common law system, the default is it's permitted. Unless there's case law, you can basically do it. Whereas in a book-based system or in a civil code, the default is it's forbidden. Unless it is explicitly allowed, then you shouldn't be doing it. And this is a kind of a big difference that adds up to quite a different way of a country operating. And here we get to why this might be relevant to translators, that basically in a common law system, you're much more likely to have permissive approaches to professions and who can do things. In a civil law system or in a religious law system, you're more likely to have clear prohibitions and clear expectations. This is added to in the UK, and I know not everyone here is from the UK or working in the UK, but nevertheless, this is added to in the UK by a strong bias towards deregulation, and this has been around for at least 30 years and cuts across governments. So the general thing that we see in our newspapers and in our media, which is that regulation is a bad thing, which of course it isn't, but nevertheless, that's a common political view and a common political standpoint. And then the final point is English monolingualism. And this is, a problem for countries which have English as a common language, a tendency to prefer English over other languages, and maybe not recognize how significant bilingualism and multilingualism are in other countries and indeed our own, and as a consequence, underserve and don't think enough about other languages because English is so dominant in our national life. So these are some of the reasons why the UK might be potentially not doing this as well as many of us think it should be. Next slide. So just to, and this I don't expect everyone to take this in, but what it basically shows you is in color-coded terms, you can find this on Wikipedia, how different countries around the world line up. And you can see the ones that are either pink or red have a common law tradition. So that was given to the US by the UK, South Africa has it, Australia has it. Then you have countries which have much more of a civil, i.e. a book-based system. All of South America, obviously because of its historic connections to Spain and Portugal, all of Europe, and then significant swathes, including Russia, of the Northern Hemisphere. And then a strong band of religious law basis for North Africa, the Middle East, and a bit of variance in Africa, again related to history and how that was affected by colonialism in many cases. So this shows you the broad split, and that possibly explains why sometimes the UK and the US seem to do things in similar ways, although of course there are lots of differences as well. It's because of that common heritage of the basis of our legal systems. Next slide. So all of that is very interesting or not. The incredibly important point is, what are we going to do about it? So I think when we reflected on what we were going to do about it with RISA and with our friends from ITI, we basically thought there's a lot of complexity potentially here. There will be a lot of argument back from government and public authorities as to why this may be difficult or can't be done, and it'll be hard to find interlocutors who will take ownership of the problem, because it always is when you're dealing with governments and public services. It'll be hard to find people who'll say, yes, I'm responsible, I can do something about this. And we'll come back to that at the end of the webinar on what we might be able to do about that together. So what we thought is, well, it may be quite hard to get everybody else into the same place, but at least we can get ourselves into the same place. So, can we, as 3 organizations with a lot to say on this topic and a great deal of experience, come together and find common purpose, find something which we can be strong on together and say, all 3 of us agree on this, we all recognize the same basic problem, and we all propose the same basic solution. And can we also make it super simple, so you don't have to be an expert in translation in order to understand this? So if you're a relatively underinformed client, or if you're new to translation, or indeed you only need it as a once-off for a particular legal contract you have, we make it super simple for people. And that's what we've tried to do here. The basic, very, very simple message is use a professional. So if in doubt, use a professional. Use a professional means either a professional that's registered with ITI or CIOL, or a professional company that's registered with ATC. And that's the kind of simple message that we want to get across to government. Spare yourself the risk and danger of things going wrong by simply following this piece of advice: use an accredited professional. And that's what we've sought to do. And I think, this is quite an important thing that we did here, which is cross-promoting each other as well. So setting aside any historic differences, or the fact that we all have different membership propositions, and just saying, look, this problem is bigger than any of that. The most important thing to get across is use a professional. I think for many people in other parts of the world, you might be surprised and staggered that we even needed to do this in the UK. But again, I think it goes back to that point about the UK's traditions and the UK's biases, which means that it tends to have a laissez-faire, or free as you go kind of approach to things, unless there is a strong reason not to. And unfortunately, that is the way that certified translation has been treated in the UK. We are also pressing, and again we'll come back to this, to improve the guidance that's given by public services and government departments. But I'll perhaps stop at that point and hand over, Raisa, to you for your take on all of this.
Thank you very much, John. And just as we go past it, because the questions and comments are flying in, but just one, you mentioned at the start about Karina Balbo and the system in Argentina. We have someone commenting saying, I do work also in Argentina, and to provide certified translations in Argentina, you need a local degree as a traductor público and Argentinian citizenship, because you're working in a semi-public service. So it is not that great a system if you are a foreign translator living in Germany, because you can't work.
Well, this is an important point, Dom, and this is, of course, the pushback that people will offer in favour of some, at least, of what happens in the UK and the US, which is that they are countries where it is easier to make a start. There are fewer restrictions, and certainly, having worked in South America, I worked in Colombia for some time. The requirement for notary public and the lengths that one has to go to get a legal contract in place, can be an issue in those countries compared to systems where it's a bit quicker and a bit more straightforward. So there are pros and cons. So it's helpful to hear that from our colleague in Argentina.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the other questions as we go along. So, Raisa, if we could move to you now. So if you could give us sort of an industry perspective or standpoint, what impact do you see these harmonisation efforts by CIOL, ITI and ATC actually having on the practice of certified translations in the UK?
Well, for me, it's pretty simple. I think the main impact is and has to be to improve our clients' experiences on having their important documents translated, and also to increase the acceptance rate of translated and certified documents with the receiving authorities, who, like John said, have got lots of different ways of understanding what is certified, what are the best practices. So that is, you know, for me, the kind of shining star behind all of this work. So us collectively, not just sitting here at the receiving end of different authorities, very diverse requirements and understanding, but going out and starting to define harmonized, unified best practices. And this is only, of course, the start for that work. So essentially, you know, I think about this as ongoing work of starting to close the loop, so that clients, whether they're individuals or organizations, companies, whoever, will know better where to go, how to get a translation done safely, and how to get it certified so that it will be approved by whatever receiving authority they need to submit it to. Because like John said, you know, our clients are not the experts, they don't know, so they need to rely on us for that information and that quality service. And of course, we all know, and certainly all of the audience who have been working with certified translations, we know that there are discrepancies in the way certified translations are produced, even between, you know, the qualified people who are doing it now. So we need to be working together even further to harmonize the landscape, because the more harmonization we can achieve, the more confidence we can instill in the clients and also the receiving authorities, and the more credibility we have as the leading organizations to set the best practices. So this is a kind of grassroots movement that we hope is going to start gaining momentum as we go along. But of course, you know, all of you who have been working with certified translations know that there are also huge discrepancies between the different receiving authorities, of which there are many in the UK, not all of them under the government either. And at the moment, currently, that creates a very fluzy, uneven ground with which to work on. So it's very difficult to produce a certified translation in the UK at the moment that you can be confident on will be approved by the receiving authority, especially if you haven't been working with that authority before. So what I have seen and what ATC member companies have been reporting to us is that there are major issues with certified translations being rejected because they don't have the right wording, or they're bound differently from another receiving authority, or have the wrong signature, or whatever else it is. And this is obviously a major stumbling block, because we're talking about, for example, court cases where the certified translation is sitting there for months and then comes back rejected because suddenly one little paragraph clause embedded somewhere deep down in guidelines hasn't been followed. And this is a problem for all of us. So we need to also start pulling the receiving authorities closer to the certification best practices that we start setting, because they are not being set at the top level, instead of waiting for these fragmented authorities to do that. So the value in collaboration between the ATC and the CIOL and the ITI is really to increase our joint credibility, you know, present a unified front and start agreeing on what the best practices should actually look like. And to me, what we've done so far, and specifically the first step on that route that has been really meaningful, is to say our practices are different at the moment, but we're going to endorse each other's practices, because that gives us more value than going out and kind of banging our own individual drums. So that's the reason why we're really passionate about continuing to do this work, and this is what I feel the impact is. And then, of course, we know that there are differences. It will be difficult to harmonize absolutely everything. I don't think we'll necessarily ever get there. We know that already between the CIOL and the ITI, there are different certification practices. And like John said earlier, there are different levels of membership and so on. And then, of course, the ATC is the Association of Translation Companies. So the major difference there is that with ATC members, it's not a named single translator who is doing the certification. It is the company that holds the ATC certification stamp. And this is something that we discussed quite at length during the work that we did to start this harmonization process. And what we realized through these conversations is that it's not really about who does the translation, it's about creating transparency and accountability in the translation and certification process. And that's one of the key issues in having a system where anybody can be a translator. You know, the first issue with that is that there's no guarantees that somebody will have the necessary language skills to do that. But the second big issue is that there is no accountability, there's no transparency there. And that is something that all of us share. So having named members who appear in our member directories, who sign up to our respective codes of professional conduct, having members inside our professional association umbrellas gives us access to mechanisms to, for example, handle complaints or any issues. So to me, that's the point at which our different systems are at a level playing field, and that's the point that we've started from to start creating this level of harmonization. So that's my take on the landscape. And on the ATC side, you can see there on the slide just a screenshot. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that. Just a screenshot of how we're communicating these harmonized practices, or at least the start of that. This is a screenshot of our client guide that helps to outline also to the client side as to what certified translation means, how do we produce it, what does it look like, so that gives an added level of credibility and trustworthiness to the process that our accredited ATC member companies do. So within the ATC, we've got two different types of member categories. We've got accredited, so these are companies whose background we've checked, and then we've got associates and members who don't go through a vetting process, but who nevertheless subscribe to our professional code of conduct. But it is only the accredited member companies who have the right to the ATC certification stamp. So that's my take on our work together.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Raisa. Okay, there's an unbelievable number of questions and comments coming in on the chat, and we will get to those soon. But first, Mariam, and we're getting people giving examples of practice in all sorts of countries around the world, and you have extensive experience of delivering certified translations. First of all, in the UAE, and of course for a long time in the UK as well. Can you explain a bit how the process works in the UAE, what differences you found in the UK, you know, unique challenges that you've encountered in the process of certifying translations?
Thank you, Don. And it was great listening to Jean and Raisa as well. And I think they've already, I mean, listening to them, our audience will have already got a sense of kind of the uniqueness. I'll use the word uniqueness because I'm going to try very hard today to avoid using negative words. The uniqueness of the UK market when it comes to certified translation. So like you said, I started my career in translation in the UAE. That's coming to almost 17 years ago now. So well, 17 years ago since I moved to the UK, more than that since I started my career in the UAE. And I was working in a legal translation office. So just to give you a sense of what that was like. So the UAE system of certified translations basically is premised on individuals being individual translators being accredited or being identified, recognized as sworn translators. So you need to have a degree in translation or the relevant experience as a translator, so a number of years. I believe that it was 3 years at the time. It may have changed then, or perhaps 5 years with a relevant degree. In my case, because I had studied translation at BA level, I was able to sit the exam straight away. So you need that, like I said, the degree plus experience, or experience on its own if you don't have a relevant degree, to be able to sit the exam. So that's the first kind of requirement. If you pass the exam, which is a kind of a rigorous exam, which is very much focused on legal translation. So one of the main functions of sworn translators in the UAE is seen as then going on to perform legal translations, translation of legal documents, of official documents. So this is why the exam is very much based on kind of legal terminology and the kind of documents that you would encounter in that field. If you pass the exam, I passed the exam. You then appear before a panel of judges in the Ministry of Justice. You take an oath. You thereby become a sworn translator. But that's not the end of it. You cannot, even though you are recognized as a sworn translator, and even though you have joined a register of recognized sworn translators by the Ministry of Justice in the UAE, you still have to be affiliated, still have to be attached to a legal translation office or to some kind of commercial body, so a bank, a company, to be able to actually use your stamp and to practice legal translation or certified translation. So in a sense, because we will talk, I'm sure, in the course of today's roundtable about different models in different countries, but the UAE model, even though, like I said, the recognition was individual, you still had to have that attachment, you still had to have that affiliation. So most sworn translators or accredited translators then would go on to work as part of legal translation offices. And I worked in Abu Dhabi, so the capital of the UAE. And in downtown Abu Dhabi, there was a street, I think there still is a street in downtown Abu Dhabi, which is affectionately referred to as the Legal Translation Street. Anyone wanting a legal translation would go to, or a certified translation would go to the street. And on one side of the street, there was a line of translation offices. On the opposite side of the street, there's lawyers' offices and notary publics, and stationery offices which provide, photocopying services and lamination services and these kind of things. So in a sense, it's your kind of one-stop shop if you want to go and get your documents certified and, recognized and everything. You go there, you get everything done in a couple of days. You're done, and you're good to go to present your documents wherever they need to be presented. Now, of course, the fact that, and it's a thriving business. The reason that it's a thriving business is the fact that even though English is recognized as, is used as a lingua franca in the UAE and is widely used and many other languages, it's a very multilingual society, Arabic is the only official language. So for any documents to be presented before the courts, for any kind of government proceedings, you needed to have your documents either in Arabic or translated into Arabic, a certified translation into Arabic. And this, of course, creates a need for there to be, there's a market basically for certified translations. So this is where I worked in the UAE. This is how I worked. When I was going to move to the UK, I wanted to continue as a certified, to practice as a certified translator. And at the beginning, I was coming here to study, but I also wanted to, practice as a freelance translator. And I thought, well, I already have that recognition. What is the equivalent to that in the UK? What is the market? And I did a little bit of research. And I was very surprised to find out that, well, there isn't any equivalent system. But even more surprised, in fact, I was kind of in complete disbelief at the fact that anyone could self-certify. I say anyone, of course, I know that there are caveats to that, not anyone, you have to be a practicing translator. But in theory, yes, anyone could self-certify. You could say that you are, basically the onus is on you. You kind of say that you have the qualifications. You say that you will have the liability, basically, the responsibility for the translation that you produce. But then, of course, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind, well, that can be very, very easily exploited. So wanting to have some kind of official recognition or accreditation in the UK, and having done my research, I felt that the closest thing was, well, I'm going to sit for the DipTrans exam. At least that being a member of a professional body gives me that bit of recognition that I feel, in addition to kind of my previous experience and my work as certified translator in the UAE, that is kind of the closest thing that I could find. Of course, until today, this is my advice to anyone who wants to either resume a career in certified translation or to practice certified translations in the UK, is to be part of a professional body. And I think this is even truer today, especially after the commitment, the joint commitment by the CIOL, the ITI and the ATC to recognize and to endorse each other's, certain member levels in their membership. And yes, so I think this is in a nutshell, where my experience and how it was like for me when I first joined the UK market. In terms of the challenges, I think many of these have already been covered, but in a nutshell, I think the biggest challenge for me has been the discrepancies in expectations, depending on the authorities that you present your certified translation to. So even though we are in the same country, and even though lots of these authorities, sometimes government authorities, they will have different expectations, rejections sometimes because, and I say this with a little bit of, sometimes you feel that they don't understand what they want, or they don't understand, what a certified translation is supposed to look like. And I have some kind of stories to share, but one of them, I think, most frustrating experiences that I've had with that is that I once sent out a certified translation to an authority, which then returned the translation, having already embossed it. The apostille was there, but then it was removed, it was ripped out. So clearly they thought it was okay, but then they had the second thought. I thought, actually, we don't know, and then sent it back. And I had to kind of send it again for translation with a long letter explaining that actually this, it does meet all of the requirements as set out by them, but also, as I have been doing for years. It was legalized in the end, but it's very frustrating for a translator, especially for an experienced translator, to have to go through that. Like I said, the rejection level, sometimes you feel like it really depends on who's receiving it at the other end. And that is something that I hope that collectively we can work very hard to avoid by bringing the authorities together, by bringing them closer to us and educating them as well as educating translators.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thank you very, very much about that. And so obviously we've heard about the UK, we've heard about the UAE, and I wonder at this stage, could I ask the sort of all of our panelists whether there are examples you can give of practices and regulations for certified translations outside of the UK, and any potential lessons maybe the UK could take from this? Maybe Raisa?
Yes, I could maybe bring my Nordic view into this, and it was really fascinating, Mariam, to hear about the practices in the UAE. What I've realized over the years of working in translation and with certified translation is how varied the practices really are. So my degree I've got a master's degree in English translation from Finland. And in Finland, the state authorized translator status does exist. It's got a legal status in that the authorized certified translations have got the same legal value as the originals. So I think that's one of the fundamental differences that different systems can have. In Finland, you have to take an exam to become a state authorized translator. So there are no requirements in terms of your education, but you have to pass the exam, and then you get the stamp under your name. So that's the system in Finland, but I've also been working, so I used to work in a translation company, and we did a lot of work with Danish. So I used to work with Danish certified translations as well. And you might think that, you know, even within the Nordic countries, the systems would be quite uniform, and certainly the legal basis, which is what John was talking about, is very similar, very close to each other. So in Denmark, the landscape was very different in that historically they had a state authorized sworn translator status as well. You didn't have to take an exam, but everybody who went through the formal translation education and became, you know, at the MA level, automatically became a certified translator. So that was always the system in Denmark. What was also different was that there was quite a lot of legal requirements on the different types of documents that needed to be certified. So there was more certification into Danish than there was into Finnish. And then something happened. So the Danish government decided that this is not what we want. This gives this group of people an unfair advantage, because they automatically become certified translators. So we're going to scrap all of that. So for a number of years now, the old certified state authorized translator system has not existed in Denmark anymore. It's been scrapped. The Danish Translators Association is of course lobbying to reinstate that. But even within this kind of, you know, small Nordic experience that I have, I've seen, you know, the scales going up and down, and the practices varying hugely. And this is where we of course come to, you know, John's original point of the UK and UK authorities just not having the appetite for this level of highly regulated work, which is another reason why we need to club together and work together to define and promote best practices by ourselves. So that's my little take on how different the different practices can be, even within very similar countries in the EU.
Very good. Okay. Common question coming in is just actually how to get started as a translator, certifying translations. Would anyone like to take that one?
Mariam, I mean, you have a lot to say on that, I would have thought, given your experience.
Well, I think I've already said kind of the first stuff. So I'll say a few things, a few tips. I'm sure that Bryce and John, you'll have kind of more to say. But one of the first things, join a professional body if you're not already a member of a professional body. There are, I mean, lots of things that are, you know, that starting out as a certified translator has in common with starting out as a translator, especially a freelance translator. So things like getting professional indemnity cover, familiarizing yourself with the code of practice. But especially if you are new to the UK or new to any context where you are practicing certified translator, familiarize yourself with the context, with the legal context, familiarize yourself with the official documents, especially the templates that they come in. I find that can be quite useful, because over time you will build your kind of template bank, and this can make you much more efficient in your translation. So things like driving licenses. So what does a driving license look like? Different types of driving licenses, birth certificates, death certificates, university degrees. These usually have some kind of template, and like I said, it's very useful to to look at these. And some of these are kind of really available online. You don't need to wait for one to come through to you from a client to be able to to actually see what it looks like. So these are some of my kind of tips, especially for certified translation. But like I said, things like building your network, continuous professional development, just staying informed, really, some of those tips which apply to any kind of translation, apply to any kind of, just being a practicing translator, are also applicable here.
Very good. Very good. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to start reading some of the questions and comments out, because they're just so many. So if we've covered them already, then we'll go quickly. But So are CIOL or ITI considered certified translations considered accepted in Europe? So translations are fixed with adhesive seals of ITI or CIOL. I mean, what would be the position in Europe?
Well, you know, we are in a slightly cleft stick with Europe because, of course, post-Brexit, we have extricated ourselves from a lot of the norms and conventions. So a lot of this now falls back on bilateral relations and history of recognition. So, you know, it is important, as Mariam was saying, to look at the specific requirements in specific countries. And I think, you know, it's fair to say that anyone who is UK based probably does face a more significant hurdle these days than was the case latterly, because the starting point will be a little bit more doubt about you know, anyone who is engaging with a system in an EU country if they're coming at it from the UK. What's been your experience, Raisa?
Yeah, I think the basic rule here has to be both within the UK and also from the UK to elsewhere is whatever the receiving authority accepts is what the certification needs to look like. So, you know, regardless of how much work we do in terms of promoting best practices and, you know, networking and doing our bit, if the certification authority says this is what it needs to look like, then that's what it needs to look like. And the same principle applies regardless of whether you're submitting something for non-UK authorities as with authorities in the UK.
I think, and we were talking about this earlier, weren't we, Mariam, about Egypt and the interesting thing that the UK government in the UK seems to not be quite clear on what certified translation should look like, whereas the UK government in Egypt, as in the British Embassy, is crystal clear on what a certified translation needs to look like. And I think this does, you know, bring home Raisa's point. I worked for the British Council for many years, and the fundamental point about, you know, international work is when you're in another country, it's their jurisdiction. So it really doesn't matter whether you're from the UK or from the US or where you're from, the prevailing jurisdiction, other than in, you know, the postage stamp sized piece of land that an embassy sits on. When you're in a country, you are subject to their jurisdiction and rules, which of course is one of the reasons, you know, and one of the costs of doing business, that because systems around the world vary so much, that is one of the more significant obstacles, you know, to trade. And of course, you know, one of the great things that things like the European Union help to mitigate, because if you're exposed fully to you know, the differences in different countries, all of the work comes back to, you know, the individual translator or the individual translation company, or indeed the individual company that's trying to do business. And, you know, we're seeing that. We had a council away day last week, Mariam, which you were at, and you know, that's one of the things that people were saying, that certainly post Brexit, from a UK perspective, lots of smaller companies are just finding it so much more difficult to trade, and are now being exposed to, you know, much greater significant regulatory obstacles. The only good thing in that, I guess, is that you know, they will need more help from translators to navigate that than was the case. But certainly, I think we'd all rather that wasn't the case.
Great. Okay. Well, just while we're talking Europe, there's it's not really a question but a point here, but many thanks for an interesting roundtable from Alexandra. I would like to point out how important it is to have harmonisation within the UK, all the more so as there are talks about a European register of sworn certified translators at the moment, and it seems crucial to me to have the UK included in it. That's a comment. Okay. I
mean, just one observation on that. I think we shouldn't lose hope on these things. I do think that you know, Horizon, which is a big European research project that anyone who works in universities will be very familiar with, you know, having the UK having turned its face against Horizon, which I think many people thought was catastrophic, really, has now negotiated to re-enter Horizon, and I think that could be the beginning of starting to take a more reasonable view about these very, very significant European conventions that, you know, the UK loses out massively by being outside of. So, you know, I'm quietly hopeful for Erasmus, that we may see Erasmus come back one day. And I think these sorts of registers, once we've renormalized, if you like, our relationships, then, you know, the natural place for the UK is within these sorts of conventions and frameworks. It's you know, madness for us to be outside them. So I'm hopeful that we will start to reconnect. But at the moment, we have, you know, cut ourselves out of things, and there are a number of websites that you can go to and look at where you'll have not only EU countries, but also wider European countries and you know, Turkey and countries you know, beyond the immediate perimeter of Europe, who are all in them, and the only flag that's missing is the UK's flag. So, you know, there is a lot of work to do to reintegrate the UK into all of these conventions.
Okay, thank you. So
one other thing I will say, and that is that as we will all know, you know, Europe is not a homogeneous entity. So you have very, very different, you know, movements within Europe. You know, the sort of southern European countries have traditions around codes and norms. The northern European countries can see things a little bit differently sometimes. So it's not as if the UK was the only country that you know, that sometimes didn't support you know, Europe-wide measures. The other thing to recognise is, of course, that Central and Eastern European countries also very often see things quite differently. You know, Poland is a very, very significant and large country within the EU, which often sees things in you know, in quite a different way in terms of regulation. So they all have their different traditions. So, you know, we do, you know, it will be interesting to see if a consolidated European register is achieved. I think it's a great thing to set out for, but I suspect there'll be quite a lot of work to get all of the different parts of the European family together on it.
okay, so a question here coming in, so saying it's actually not just governments and public services who don't understand certification, but it can be private clients as well. The latter seem to think that what applies in their country applies in the UK. So it would be really helpful for instructions re what is meant by certification to be provided to clients by organisations requiring it for onward transfer to the translator. Does the panel agree?
Yes.
Absolutely.
And I think that's
go on, Raisa.
No, I was going to say that that's maybe one of our weaker points, that we haven't been very good at that in the past. We've been doing certified translations for yonks, but we haven't been very good at explaining what that actually is, how does it work, what needs to happen for a certified. And of course, we're not just talking about certified translations. Mariam's already mentioned about legalization, apostilles, you know, this and that and the other that are required for different types of certifications for different receiving authorities. So I think we can be a lot better in that in the future.
And is it worth saying, Raisa, that we are hopeful that we might be able to make a small step in that direction with maybe a slightly longer and fuller document which sets out at least some of the things that different countries require, so that, you know, we start to capture a little bit more of the practice around the world and make that available to people?
Yeah, I think that would be really hugely useful in the longer term. I think maybe the first next step will be around what Mariam was already talking about. How do you get in? How do you know what is best practice, what to deliver, and so on? So there's one, you know, we have already started working together on a document to outline what is certified translation, and maybe that's the first document that we could fully harmonize between ourselves so that we all share the same understanding. How do we talk about certified translations? What are the different bits around it, and how it can be done? And that would be a great resource for all of our members already. So maybe that's the first step, and then we go on from there. I mean, this is not going to be ready anytime soon. I think we've all got you know, enough work on this until the cows come home / we retire from this business. But I think it's important that we start making tangible steps together.
Okay, there's a number of questions.
Just one other thing, Dom, to say is that, of course, and it's stating the very obvious, but it does help to frame this in terms of what the benefit is to the end user. And the benefit to the end user, of course, is the confidence that that what they have is correct, and the risk mitigation. So, you know, the surest way to get government's attention on something, or indeed many companies' attention on something, is to point out the risks if they don't do it in the right way. That you know, your contract being invalidated or your exposure to liability is you know, is always the thing that gets people's attention when their starting point is, I'd really rather not spend any money on this if I can avoid it, or I want to, you know, have this done as cheap as possible. So I think without, you know, scaring people, just getting across to them what the risks are that you know, are associated with an incorrectly done translation and what can go wrong, I think is an important thing for us to get across. And that's what we've done, Raisa, with what we've said to government. You know, why would you want to run the risk? Why would you take the risk of miscarriages of justice, of you know, terrible things happening to people in you know, in the immigration and asylum system, you know, when you could have you know, that avoided by getting the right you know, translation done at the outset? Because the cost of fixing a problem is, you know, way higher than the cost of avoiding it upstream.
And if I might add, John, I think, and I completely agree, and I think especially when it comes to persuading government to the need to kind of introduce in some kind of regulation, it really is that it's convincing them that there is a problem, that there is an issue that needs to be fixed, because otherwise, you know, if they think that, you know, the system is okay, you know, basically if it's not broken, why fix it? If they think it's good enough, there won't be an appetite to introduce any change in the system. But obviously, as we well know, it is not good enough. And what we need to be doing more of is trying to convince them that it is not good enough, and producing evidence, you know, from the asylum system, but also from, you know, basically from high stakes scenarios where things are going wrong and there indeed is a risk. And the government, I'm sure, you know, anyone who, you know, I'm sure the government will also, different bodies and authorities will also agree that if we present the risk, if we show them that there is a risk, and, you know, clear and present risk, that they will want to avoid this risk, or we would hope to think that they want to avoid the risk.
Yeah, and I think we had an example of that in a slightly different domain last week. Again, something that we've worked on with Raisa and the ITI and others, and NERPC, you know, first and foremost, to, you know, flag the risks in public service interpreting. And I think if we have all of the stakeholders, all of the professional associations, and all of the registers, you know, together on the things, then when we point out, you know, some of the things that have gone wrong in the NHS, or point out some of the things that go wrong in the criminal justice system, I think it becomes harder to ignore us. So I do think that working together amplifies the voice, and means that that we don't come across as being a pressure group. We come across as actually being, you know, on the right side of the argument and just setting out the plain facts of the matter.
Yeah. And also coming to them with a solution. So saying, these are the risks, these are the issues, and this is the solution, rather than, you know, remaining fragmented and saying these are the issues, and by the way, we've got 10 different solutions that each of us is going to lobby now to you. So that's the value of the harmonization, and that increases our chances of actually getting that best practice through.
Okay, so we've got another question here. I've found that often UK courts, or rather often different judges, request different items of information from LSP certifications or linguist certifications, which is leading to confusion, inconsistency, and ultimately impacting on the longevity and cost of the particular case that the court is dealing with. Interestingly, most often this year, I have found it to be a greater issue with family courts. Further, government departments also seem to have a different approach requirement to certifications, e.g. Foreign Process Department versus Consular Directorate. So we've covered this a bit, but of course, what more can be done to provide a more unified approach regarding wording requirements, at least among courts and government departments?
Well, we have, and Raisa and I, and again, our friends from ITI are on it, along with PI4J. We have regular forums with the Ministry of Justice, and we have a broader conversation about the health of the profession, a broader conversation about standards and in particular qualifications, and making sure that people have the right standards of skill and the right experience and the right qualifications. But we also have a practical slot where we talk about specific things that have happened, and invite the Ministry of Justice to go away and have a look at what can be done about them. One of the things that you see in the practical slot is that I think the courts are quite devolved. So the individual practice around individual judges and individual courts is more variable than you might hope at times. So that's one of the things that we found, small but important things around, access to the courtroom, access to documents in advance, etc., can vary quite significantly. But I think, the fundamental answer to this is we can take this to the working group and, point out that there are unnecessary risks and there is unnecessary waste that is being created by slightly different readings of the same, same requirements in different UK court systems. It is, of course, we have to acknowledge that the UK does have different legal systems. So, if we're talking about a difference between England and Wales and Scotland, then that is two totally different legal systems. But nevertheless, within England and Wales, if that's what we're talking, then I think if we can present the example, we can just add to the pressure to harmonise there.
Okay, so another question here: should all translators be able to certify translations, or only those with qualifications? So only those translators with qualifications. If only qualifications, which ones? Legal and linguistic, or just linguistic qualifications?
Would you like me to have a go at that one? And then other people can absolutely disagree with me. Again, I think it's jurisdiction based. So in the UK, I think what we would say for the UK would be that we would want to see a translator being active, accredited, and accountable. And that's basically the common feature, I think, of CIOL's registered translators, ITIs, and also the translation companies that Raisa represents. That what you would see from each of them is that they would tick those 3 A's. They would be obviously active as translators. They would be accredited either with a body as an individual or with a body via a company, and they would be accountable if something went wrong. Now, clearly, if you're in a different jurisdiction, as we were talking about, you may have specific qualification requirements and specific registration requirements in order to be doing a certified translation. But for the UK, for me, it's the 3 A's: active, accredited, accountable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. To me, the main issue is around are you competent to do that, and if you can demonstrate that you're competent to do that, then that's the starting point, which is exactly what John was talking about. But also not to forget in this landscape that when we talk about certified translations and certifications, this is a huge field which varies from the very complex legal domain where you absolutely need to have the legal competencies in order to do a good job with the translation and to translate that correctly, to the fairly basic ones, which is some of the certificates, for example, birth certificate, like Mariam said, you've got the template, it always looks the same, it always has to look the same. That doesn't require the same legal competencies and legal skills. So it's also a continuum, this idea of what competencies you need for what type of certified translations, which is also why I would hesitate to start promoting a very narrow qualifications experience accreditation route. To me, it's more about the competencies coupled with the accountability, so the accreditation piece that John mentioned.
Just one other point on that. Oh, sorry, Mariam, just quickly, and then I'll pass to you. I think the code of conducts are important here as well. That, you know, code of conducts invite you to reflect on your competence and your experience before you take something on. And, you know, all of us will have seen, you know, complaints and occasions where, particularly in a legal context, where translators have found themselves in difficulty. Obviously, in a legal context, if there's a, you know, a slight nuance that you don't capture, it can, you know, be very, very significant in a case. And, you know, of course, if something does turn on the translation of a word, then, you know, you can expect the prosecution or the defence side, depending on which side you're representing, to come at the translator with the full force of their legal argument. So, you know, the stakes can be quite high, and the personal stakes can be quite high for people when they're doing something which contains a high level of risk or a high level of impact. So I think that's the thing that the code of conducts kind of bring into scope. You know, you would want as a translator to be confident that you have the skill and the expertise to do the level of complexity that you're doing. And if you're doing a very high stakes court case, for example, you would want to have had some considerable experience, I think. So I think there's an element also of self-reflection in this.
Okay,
I'm just going to say, to add to that. Oh, go on, Dom.
No, go on, Mariam, please.
I was just going to say that, to add to that, and I think Raisa already kind of pointed out that it is a kind of a very wide field. What we end up translating as certified translators certificates are one side of them. These are the easiest, but especially when it comes to kind of court documents, court proceedings, you do need to know your legal terminology. Also, depending on where you will practice, you may end up with so as a certified translator, you know, as a legal translator in the UAE, we often had to translate medical reports, for instance. So, you know, being a medical translator, you know, can be useful in that sense, and you can find your niche. I mean, you can specialize in something, and this is something that we often, especially maybe not when you're just starting out, but certainly when you've accumulated enough experience, is to specialize in something. I think it's quite useful for you in terms of kind of, you know, knowing what kind of text you want to focus on, but also for clients to know that this is something. I think it kind of adds that extra level of credibility for your clients to know that, right, I'm going to approach this person who specializes in certifying translations of medical reports, for instance, because they have, you know, they can demonstrate that they have experience in that.
Great. Okay, so we've got another comment here, and I'm going to apologise in advance because we're not going to be able to do everyone's questions and comments because there are just so many, but we have one here. While the UK government has a helpful explanation of what they view as certified translations, .gov.uk certifying a document, another link also on the government website says you'll need to have your documents translated. The translator does not need to have any qualifications, so the translation can be done by a friend or a family member. This is in relation to a gender recognition certificate.
Yes, that one in particular, we flagged, and we have also seen that particular one. And I think, you know, people might well reflect that a gender recognition certificate is a significant document, and therefore why wouldn't you want to have that done by a competent and trained professional? So yes, that piece of guidance is a real outlier. I think in most other cases, people are pointed to the standard.gov.uk, which basically says use a accredited professional. But even that is a little loose. And Raisa and I have written to them again this week to flag that we think that central piece of guidance, firstly, why not have that as the standard guidance for everything? And then secondly, could they just tighten it up a bit and make it a little bit clearer, and perhaps also reference, what the sources of qualified and accredited translators and translation companies are. Raisa, do you want to say a bit about that as well?
Yeah, I think this is going to be the major bits in that. what we also want to do with this work together is to create a pull effect for all of the other authorities who are doing something totally different, so that we get to a point where on the gov.uk generalist pages we've got uniform guidance, and that's what we're starting to work on now that we're at this the beginning of our harmonization journey. So that's going to be a hugely big piece in this. Once we've got that, once we've got our mutually endorsed best practices and so on, that also creates the foundations for a much stronger grassroots movement from our members. You know, like Mariam was talking about, you know, you just don't know why things get rejected, you know, even by somebody who's as experienced as she is. So we also need to create an environment where our members collectively know that they can go back to the authorities and say, but look here, this is what the gov.uk general guidance says. These are the best practices that are endorsed by the leading trade associations in the UK. Maybe you can reconsider, and so on. So to create that movement, because there's no way that the associations here would be able to reach every single receiving authority. I mean, it's just not possible. So that's why we also need to work together with our members so that they take this and they start shifting those receiving authorities' views on what certified translation is and should be towards the best practice guidelines that we recommend, that we set. So that's my view. I'm sure it's going to take a while, but I think that'll be really powerful if we do that together.
Yes, and just to add on that I think that, you know, if you put yourself in the position of a person, a civil servant who is trying to do the right thing, which they generally speaking are, then, you know, what they would want, I guess, would be to make sure that they're not falling foul of anything in the recommendations that they give. So if they can point to a place on .gov.uk which says, well, here's what the correct approach is, then that helps them and de-risks them. So I think if there is a common place that we can go to and they can go to, then it just makes everybody's life simpler. Whereas, you know, putting yourself again in the shoes of a civil servant, if one organisation comes to you and says, please recommend my members for this kind of work, your instinctive reaction is going to be no, you know, because I can't prefer one over another, and I can't be creating a monopoly or any kind of anti-competitive practice. So this is why it's so important that we do these things together, so that we don't trip at the first hurdle in terms of, you know, violating a fundamental principle of civil service life, which is you can't prefer one over another. So what we have to do is present this as industry-wide, everybody agrees, common sense, shared best practice, and then it becomes possible to get it adopted.
Okay, so lots of people making sort of similar comments as well. I'll just read one out. I think the UK has a special problem because translation and interpreting in question marks are both regarded as unregulated professions. Anyone can set up as a translator. Fortunately, thanks to the work done by ITI and CIOL with ATC, we have persuaded government department, ministries, DVLA, etc., to accept that a professional translator, whether that's MCIL, MITI, or anyone else, can certify their own translations. So thank you for that. There are lots and lots of comments about the different systems in different countries. We've had Algeria, Spain, Italy. I was tempted to read Italy just because of my Italian links, but I won't do that. Lots of questions around rates as well, and I appreciate we're probably not necessarily going to be able to answer that, but whether anybody has any comments on sort of reasonable rates or what you can charge for, whether formatting and other sort of tasks around delivering a certified translation. So sort of practical questions there. Does anyone feel like they could say anything on that?
Well, I mean, I'll say something on it. You know, it's very interesting. And again, when I was looking at Argentina, you know, Argentina has the Colegio de Traductores, you know, which has a clear rate card for different language families, different word counts, and various other things. And you look at something like that and you think, wow, that's incredibly straightforward, isn't it? And incredibly clear. And yet, any time we talk about rates in a UK context, everybody immediately goes silent. You know, because it's the topic that we don't talk about. So I know that that ITI have done some work recently on this topic. We have also talked about doing some work on this topic. I think you know, it is a difficult one because it goes all the way back to that point about what sort of system are we. If you're a highly regulated and controlled system, then fixed pricing, you know, is something that you can aspire to and you can impose to some extent, because you know, you have control on all of the participants in the industry, you have control of the people who are buying, and you have control of the people who are selling, and you can control prices. That's the absolute opposite of the UK system. The UK system and everything that that all of the players in the UK system seek is the freedom to have, you know, unconstrained supply and unconstrained demand, and therefore it's a much more difficult environment to set and impose pricing. And indeed, we have, you know, whole swathes of legislation, you know, around anti-competitive practices, which indeed Europe also has, which you know, specifically forbid you from any form of price fixing or attempt to set pricing. So I think it's a case of recognizing the, you know, the fundamental different wiring diagram of different you know, countries and systems. So I think, you know, we have talked about whether we could find ways to help people understand, you know, what the sorts of rates are, what a high, medium, and low rate might look like, you know, what they could reasonably aspire to. But it's very difficult to do because people, you know, guard their rates quite jealously, and, you know, don't want to talk about them because for two reasons really, I guess. If you're getting a fantastic rate, you know, you want to maintain that, and if you're not getting a fantastic rate, then you might feel a bit, you know, uncomfortable about sharing that fact. So I think it's a tricky one. We can try, but it's always been difficult hitherto. Any views from you, Raisa?
Nothing to add. I think it's also a question, especially with certified translations, is like how long is a piece of string? If, you know, I'm a qualified translator, if I started to you know, translate a complicated certificate, it would take me all day. Mariam does it in half an hour because she's been doing them for 20 years and she's got the templates that are her intellectual property that she's worked really hard on building. But it, you know, it takes her a fraction of time. So also in terms of providing the service, I think there's all sorts of things that move along there. I don't know, Mariam, what you would say to that.
I mean, I would say that certified translation is a service that comes at, you know, it's a kind of a premium. So as opposed to, you know, a translation of a similar document that doesn't require certification. And the premium here is it's not the time that's involved, it's not the effort that's involved, it's more the kind of the legal liability that basically you're putting your name forward, you are certifying the translations, kind of putting your stamp on it and saying, you know, I stand by it, I am ready to take responsibility, legal responsibility for the translation. That's not to say that we don't, I mean, we have liability for any translation that you produce, but there's certainly kind of a higher level of liability that comes with certified translation. And this is why, you know, certified translators or accredited translators would be expected to charge a higher charge for that service, a higher fee for that service. The other thing, I mean, there are many other factors which determine, and I am kind of loath to, again, kind of prescribe rates or advise on rates, because there are many things that, you know, you have to consider. I mean, the language combination, the things that we always take into consideration, things like how long you have to produce the translation, Even how you calculate the rate will also vary. So for example, for certificates, it tends to be a per page charge rather than a kind of a per word charge. So that's quite different to, for example, contracts and legal proceedings and things like that. It will vary a great deal, and I think within the UK market it does vary a great deal. I think you start to get a sense, this is where professional networks are quite important, because it's only through professional networks that you get a sense of, you know, what the rates are in that particular field, or kind of for specific types of documents, and in your language combination, of course.
Very good. Some comments coming in about rates. I mean, people in general saying they charge a bit more or for add-on services. They're giving examples of different countries. And an interesting comment here. Regulation of pricing within a mandated system such as sworn translation may swing things the opposite way and drive individuals out of said system, could it not? I understand the French sworn system has so few or has ever fewer linguists due to poor pay and terribly late payments. Perhaps what is needed in the UK and what we appear to be trying to be working towards is better guidelines, frameworks, rather than full mandating of the minutiae. Various other, lots of people coming in and agreeing with Marian's comments on that as well. I've just realised we are pretty much running out of time here, and we still wanted to have one last question and some polls here. So apologies to everybody who's put in a comment and it's not been read or the question's been asked. But just one final question, and obviously we talked about a lot of where we were and where we are now, and with the efforts there. What can we expect to see happening with certified translations, and this is maybe particularly for the UK over the coming years, and maybe if I could ask John or Raisa to just address that.
Well, I think the number one thing that Raisa and I, and I'll talk to Sarah at ITI about as well, I think the number one thing we would want to train our sites on is the .gov.uk guidance. And basically, I do think the gender recognition certificate is odd that one is described in the way that it is. And I think basically inviting and getting a rewrite of the .gov.uk guidance, and then making that the single piece of guidance that more entities refer to, I think would be our realistic first objective for 2024. Then there's the more fuller articulation of the different systems and different things to be aware of, which we have started work on. But as Raisa says, that will take a little bit more time. But I think number one, and we might crowdsource some collective enthusiasm for this, would be to knock on the door of .gov.uk and say, can we please improve this guidance?
Great.
Raisa?
No, that's it. That's it. I fully agree.
Fantastic. Okay, great. So just to close out the roundtable, then we do have 3 more quick polls. So I wonder if we could load up the first poll. So, do you expect the UK government to introduce specific regulation for certified translations? Obviously, we've talked about harmonising best practice and guidelines. Please get your votes in here. They're coming in. We'll give it another sort of 3 or 4 seconds. Okay, and I think we can close it. Okay, so we can see. So, do you expect the UK government to introduce specific regulation? Yes, say 27% of people. Unsure, say 44% of people. And no chance, say 29% of people. So that's probably pretty much in line as we might have expected there, but very interesting nonetheless. And if we could have the next poll, please. So we mentioned about some of the issues, and they were covered in here with some of the information on .gov.uk. So would you be prepared to contact? We will follow up after this roundtable with an email, and if people are interested with some instructions on how to get in contact, and if you would be prepared to help us with that, obviously a simple yes, no, and we'll just hold that open for another sort of couple of seconds. Okay, so if we could get the results. 85% saying yes, so thank you very much. Details of that will follow. That's great, very much appreciated, and I'm sure that can help make a difference as well to get all this information updated. So our final poll, if we could load that up, and do you support CIOL, ITI and ATC's efforts to harmonise best practice for translators in the UK and worldwide? Yes, this is great. Yes, but not optimistic things will change, or no strong feelings. Thank you very much for that. We'll hold this open for another 3 seconds or so. Okay, I think we can close it. And fantastic. Okay, well, 81% saying it's great, 17%, you know, positive but cynical, shall we say, and no strong feelings there, 2%. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much for that as well. So thank you all once again for attending and contributing to this fascinating discussion. Unfortunately, we have run out of time now. So just to confirm that all attendees will receive a certificate and a link to the recording within a few working days, and CIOL members can log this roundtable event on MyCPD. In the follow-up email, we will include details of how you can support updating the guidance on the .gov.uk website, as we just discussed, and we'll follow up also with a blog piece on socials as well, covering the roundtable. So do keep an eye out for that. So all that's remained is to thank our panelists, John, Raisa and Mariam. Thank you very much for your valuable and important contributions. And thank you once again to everyone for listening and participating in our roundtable. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks.